Hello and welcome to Mass Media Talk podcast. We're having fun today. We get to talk about all kinds of cool things about media literacy. So I am Brother Howard and here with Stacy. So good to have you here with us today as we get another round two. We talked about this last week, media literacy, and now we're focusing on our textbook with we'll call him Brother Potter, Mr. Potter, who is great at this media literacy stuff. So today we're going to talk about some things that are part of our discussion in our chapter 2. And so, Steve, let's get started with you. I'm going to take on a little bit about personal locus a little bit later, but I think you got some great background. We're going to talk about faulty ideas we have about the media and what that means, and then maybe take a look at why we see things the way we do and how maybe we can use media literacy skills to maybe help us to see things in a better way.
Yeah, that's something fantastic that this chapter points out, is that we need personal locus. We need to have some knowledge structures and skills to help us understand the messages. And something I appreciate that Potter points out is that he says the reason faulty beliefs are such a dangerous trap is because they are self-reinforcing. And so one of my favorite sources for getting information about media literacy is newslit.org. They're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on education for the public and also for educators on teaching media literacy and news literacy. And so I'll share an infographic, but I wanted to cover just two of the major topics that deal with this facet of self-reinforcing. And the first is confirmation bias. And confirmation biases are our natural, unconscious tendency to only notice information that conforms to what we currently believe. And so information that might be a conflict to that, we kind of overlook. We tend not to dive into that. The other is motivated reasoning. And I think that's a little bit more serious because in this case, you actively seek out or cherry pick information that conforms to your ideas, and you completely blindly overlook facts, credible information that could be correct, and you might be in the wrong, but you are so strongly held to your belief that you are unwilling to change. And so one thing that newslit.org talks about are 3 things that we can do about that. And so the first is to slow down. And Brian, you and I both know that when misinformation is shared online, a lot of it is because we are in the height of emotion. It drives at that emotion, and people tend to share information when they are really upset or really excited. And instead of taking a couple of minutes to just slow down, take a deep breath, check, just do a little bit of fact checking, and it's really easy to see that information that we're going to share or that got us so upset is inaccurate. The second is to be honest. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, Stacey, just before you jump in, I was going to say one of the things that people do a lot is when they're sharing on social media, they'll see a headline and it will be, this big headline. It's, I got to share this with all my friends. But they never actually read the article that goes with it or whatever else. And so that can be a real problem, right? Because you've got this confirmation bias. Oh, this is exactly what I'm thinking. You share it, but you don't know exactly what the content was. We just pass it along. And that can be a big problem because you don't know what it says. The rest of it says it could be completely false. But you saw the headline and said, I've got to share this with my friends.
That's such a great point. And I think especially on studies, every time I hear a study on the news, I always go and look it up. And, often these studies that say, whatever it might be, eating, a pound of chocolate a week is going to help you live 25 years longer or whatever it is, and then you find out that the study involved 25 people, and
it was done by the Nestle Corporation, right?
yeah, exactly.
Who did that study?
So you really have to be careful about, when you hear something that you don't just immediately change your beliefs or your ideas just because you hear one thing. You do have to do some research and think about, carefully consider it and look for other sources that might corroborate that same information. The second point is to be honest. And I think sometimes this is hard for us to just take stock of our current beliefs and really consider, am I approaching new information with an open mind, or am I just closing off and thinking that I'm always right? And I think we have to remember that no one is always right and that we might be wrong sometimes. And so that's one thing I love about the discussions in our class too, is that you get to see a variety of perspectives from the people in your group. And that's so valuable in just helping you open your mind a little bit to maybe something you hadn't thought about before. And then the third one is just acknowledging our personal biases. And I think this, newslit.org does a great job of pointing out that it's often issues that we're most passionate about, the confirmation bias comes out. Because when we're really passionate about something, we are probably most hesitant to be open-minded about new ideas towards that.
Yeah, that's a tough thing, because we're set a lot in our ways, and we don't like to consider that I could be wrong. And that's probably one of those things we need to automatically ask. Could I be wrong?
Yeah.
My wife probably gets annoyed at me because she'll tell me something that she read, and I said, so who wrote that? Where did that come from? I asked like 5 questions. It's like, why does it matter? Well, yeah, it's a big deal. Where did that, what, you hear a stat, who did that? Who said that? And try to verify. So, and that goes part of the media literacy is everything's formed from a perspective, that term framing. So you think about that. Every family picture I've ever taken was a compilation. Well, recently it was a compilation of 4 or 5 photoshopped together, right? Because you never know what's happening 2 seconds before or 2 seconds after, and you only get that one snapshot. And if you, say,
true.
well, that's why social media is so hard to determine what's real and what's not, because it's a single snapshot, and usually something really nice. But news media is even different, because you have journalists who report on something, and no matter what they do, they're going to see it a certain way. And so there's always some perspective that may be left out. And so we always have to consider not necessarily nefarious. There might be at times people want to put out a point of view for a very specific reason. And with social media, that can happen a lot. So that's one of the other reasons to be careful about it. And even, with some of the more notable publications, same thing, they have opinions and whatnot. So it's always good to look at it and step back and say, okay, who said this? Why did they say this? What are some other points of view? And maybe at that point then I can, start to determine. But it's hard. It takes a lot. It's hard to do. That's the part that really makes this difficult, because it's so much easier just to read that stat and say, wow, this is great. I can eat chocolate all day long and I'm going to be healthy, as opposed to, well, maybe I should probably look at that a little bit more. And I think that's one of the hardest parts for our students and for us as well, is it's a little bit difficult. But one of the other points, it brings out in our book is that, okay, media is going to be just a drudgery now, because now I have to analyze everything. I can't just go watch a movie and have fun. And of course you can, and you can read something for fun, but it's also good, you can go to a lot of movies and there's a good storyline, but oftentimes the director and the writer had some sort of subtext that's, could be political, or it could be something, with some sort of social issue. And that's good to understand that as well. And then you can decide, of course, as a great storyline. I didn't really like the subtext, but I liked it anyway. But it doesn't mean you can't like the movie. It just makes you a little bit more informed when you recommend it to everybody else. And they said, "How did you like that movie? Didn't you tell that it was all whatever?" You named the political topic of the day, kind of thing. But
That's a great point.
Stacey, you want to get the personal locus, or you want to take on? We talked a little bit about faulty reasoning. What else you want to take on today?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to chat about faulty beliefs for just a minute. I really appreciate that Potter points out that so often everyone is quick to blame the media for all of our problems. All of society's problems are caused by social media or movies or television shows. And instead of us recognizing that we have to be in charge of the amount of content that we watch and the types of content that we consume. And that goes for our kids too. I know there are a lot of students here that have families, and that's really important for us to think about too, is what kinds of content are we having our kids consume. But I wanted to just share, you can take a whole class on communication theory. And so this is just like one tiny little snippet. But George Gerbner was a communication theorist in the 1960s, and he came up with what's called the cultivation theory. And this is basically the idea that long-term exposure kind of shapes our perspective and how we view the world. And typically people that have, particularly if they watch a lot of like crime shows, for example, they're going to have a very skewed view of the world and believe that the world is a much more unsafe place than it really is. So their perception of the world is closer to what television is portraying than what actual reality is.
Yeah, yeah. I think I got a theory called the mean world syndrome, right? Where
Yes,
if you watch
exactly.
TV news every night, or whatever, and I was with my daughter. I flip over to it's France 24. It's international news, and
Oh,
the
okay.
first couple of stories were protest in Iran over the woman who died in prison, and she
Yes.
didn't have her hair done correctly or didn't cover her face correctly. Then there's another one. It was about what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, it was blood and guts and terror. And he's
Yes.
like, wow, the world's a terrible place. But where we live at, it's like, okay, you didn't see any of that thing in person. It's all remote. So is your neighbor down the street going to start rioting and shooting at you? Probably not. Unless you're living in or around right there.
So,
And
yes.
even at that, typically what happens a lot is for the TV cameras, then the TV cameras go on and there's burning and rioting because everyone wants to get that message out, and the
Yes.
TV cameras go off, and oftentimes it's much more subdued, so you never know. And that's part of that framing thing, right? Everyone's over here, hey, the cameras are here, burn things and all that kind of stuff. That's not always the case, but here in the US for things like that, it is often the case, right? Where make sure the TV cameras are on, we'll yell and scream. When they're off, let's go have lunch, kind of thing. Yeah, I think so. We had deals
Yeah.
misperception, and the other thing that goes with that, I think, Stacy, is that all the things we learn, right, from media sources, whether it's educational, something like this, you listen to a podcast, you get some information, or even of a TV show. I think of all the things I've learned, not of all of it's completely accurate, but things I've just learned because I've gone places I never could have gone by watching a movie or the news, and so I do know what's going on, and I'm informed, and it's kind of like the study I talked about in the book that blames, the massive consumption of TV on people not being as smart or not scoring as high an IQ. But
Yes.
the reality
Exactly.
was, right, according to the book, actually up to about 30 hours, then there's not a big differentiation. In fact, people who watch no TV lower performance and lower IQs than those who watch 15 to 20 hours. And then you get up above 30, and then, the level of school performance starts to go down over time because you're watching 34 hours and you're not doing anything else, right? So that's
Right.
probably a problem.
Exactly.
But or you could be watching, the Science Channel all day long. Maybe you're incredibly ingenious. I'm not sure. But, so there's definitely some things that go on with that. But I was thinking that kind of leads us into the personal locus of with
Yes.
media. If we just sit and watch, read, and it's just kind of this to soak it all in, then that's kind of an issue. So our personal locus is what are our goals that we have when we're actually consuming media, and what drives us to that. And so, the goal could be simply, could really be a lot of people that had our day. My goal is I am going to veg out and I'm going to forget the world. And so, your drive is, that could be it. And that's actually real. That's you want to do that. But
Absolutely.
for others, it might be, okay, why am I, if you're doing that all the time with social media, why am I scrolling through Instagram for 5 hours? What was my goal? What was my drive? Well, I have no goal. I just bored. And so if you look at that and say, okay, I really don't have a goal, to say, okay, what are my goals as far as media concerned? And maybe this
Yeah.
doesn't align with it because, and then my drive, well, I'm just letting myself float because I didn't really define a goal. And so now I'm just floating along and I'm letting media drive me. We talk about who's the master, is the media your master or you're the master of the media? And if you don't have specific goals and whatever the drive is to get to those goals that you want, then the media is going to move you around, and then we kind of become pawns to lots of messages that come out
Yeah.
because we're really not thinking about it. What's your thought on that? I think that's one of the most critical things is what is my role in my media consumption, and do I have a purpose for it?
Absolutely. It's so important, and it's a great place to start. And I think doing the media journal this week for our
Yeah.
one of our project is a great eye-opening experience where you kind of, a lot of students are surprised by how much media they're consuming. I think so often students think of mass media as just social media, but there's so much more to it. And so taking all of that into account and setting some goals, and we'll be focusing on that for the rest of the semester, really.
Yeah.
And you'll, at the end of the semester, get to set some long-term goals. But I think even starting now, I think you can find a lot of benefit over the next, 12 weeks in just taking more accountability for the kinds of media that you're consuming, making some goals about, maybe even setting a timer on your Instagram
Yeah.
app,
Yeah.
and just really paying attention to and carefully paying attention to how much you're using mass media and whether or not it's serving a good purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. I think I shared this. I don't know if I shared this in my webinar or not, but I don't remember if I did. But, when I was a young college student, married, money was a big deal. And there were several of us, actually one couple, they were meeting with a finance counselor. And his first thing he said, this is what you got to do. You got to track every cent that you spend. But until you know where you spend all your money, I can't help you. So they went through and tracked every cent. And I don't remember exactly how much, but the wife in this situation loved bubble gum, and she would buy it on a regular basis. So after months, she realized she was spending, for a college student, quite a bit on gum, probably more than she had ever anticipated. It was probably 15, 20, $30. I don't know, but she was spending a lot on your pack of gum was like, 50 cents a dollar, and you buy one every couple of days. And like, I spent $5 this week, then 10, 15, 20. She didn't know that. But once she knew that, she could make a couple of choices. Okay, I really love bubble gum. I'm not going to give it up, so I'm going to make the rest of the budget fit around my bubble gum habit. Or she can say, ooh, that's a lot of bubble gum. Maybe I can cut it back, and maybe I only chew, 3 packs of bubble gum a day instead of 2. Whatever. But the bottom line is she was informed. And that's the same thing with our media consumption. If we never take into account, we just never know, and we don't know, and we can make assumptions. Most of the students, when they do this, almost all consume more than they thought. There's only a few that say, oh, I thought it was going to be a lot more, and it's actually less, and it might have just been a week, and they didn't. But usually that's a lot more hours than it anticipated. So it's good to know. It doesn't mean you have to stop using media. It just means, okay, now that I know, I can make an informed decision. I'm still going to watch 5 football games a weekend because that's my love of my life, and I'm going to do it anyway. And there goes 20 hours of my life. But if you think it's worth it, then that's fantastic, because then we're going to talk about media winners and losers here in a few weeks.
Yes.
And you feel like you won because you got what you wanted. It fulfilled your goals, and you're happy. And other people, like if I were asked that to my wife, for example, and she'd say, "You loser! Why are you watching 5 football games a weekend?" So it's all part of it's a matter of perspective, right?
So much of perspective. Yes, absolutely. That's great. I am excited to hear what all of you learned from this assignment, and I'm excited to read your thoughts on our discussion this week too. I think, having an open mind, being willing to look at the facts and really pay attention to the kinds of media that you're consuming and what you're consuming can make a big difference on even how you feel every day. And being media literate is, I always say, it's not just a semester goal, like at the end of the semester. This is a lifelong pursuit to be media literate, and it's going to continually change and grow over time. But hopefully you're building some tools and skills now that will help you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that is the hope. And we do get comments from people who's like, man, I wish I would have learned this earlier. I'm going to continue to use this. So maybe they're just being nice, but I think actually these are skills that are really very helpful.
Absolutely. And I really do think every college student needs to take this class. It's just so beneficial to have a very, I call it a media literacy toolbox, but to have a sturdy toolbox full of tools that will help you navigate mass media, because it's, it's a crazy world out there. And
there's no escape.
Being educated about it is the best answer.
Cool. All right, Stacey, any final words before we wrap it up? I think those are some great topics today.
Yes. No, this is such a great chapter. So I'm excited for week 3. I can't believe we're here.
All right, moving right along. Well, thanks, Stacey. It was a lot of fun, and we'll talk about more things next week. There's always new stuff to talk about, but the cool thing is we all have media all around us. I think one of the things we need to do is not just think we know it all, because we don't. We know how to turn the switch on. We know how to scroll, but that doesn't make us media literate. That just means we can turn on the buttons.
Such a good point.
Of course, some of us struggle with that sometimes too, but it's been a lot of fun. Well, thanks, Stacey. It's been good to chat with you.
Thanks so much,
Let's do it again next week. Okay.
All right.
3, 2, 1.